The morning sun was just breaking through the courthouse windows when Robert Thompson clocked in for another day at work. He had been doing this same routine for 5 years now, walking through those heavy glass doors, nodding to the cleaning crew, and taking his position at the security checkpoint. Most people would find this job boring, but for Robert it was exactly what he needed after everything he had been through. You see, Robert wasn't always a courthouse security guard. Just 8 years ago, he was Marine Sergeant Robert Thompson, serving his country in the dusty mountains of Afghanistan. Those were different times, harder times, but times that shaped him into the man he was today. When people looked at Robert, they saw a quiet, reliable guy who never caused trouble and always showed up on time. What they didn't see was the weight of memories he carried from 3 tours of duty overseas. The small bronze star pin on his uniform told a story that Robert rarely shared with anyone. It wasn't just a piece of metal to him. That pin represented the worst and best day of his military career, rolled into one unforgettable moment that still visited him in his dreams sometimes. It happened during his second tour in Afghanistan. Robert and his squad were on patrol in a valley that locals had warned them about. The Taliban liked to use that area for ambushes, but intel suggested it was clear that day. Intel was wrong. The attack came out of nowhere, just like they always did. One moment, Robert was joking with his buddy Jake about the terrible food they had for breakfast. The next moment, bullets were flying from every direction, and his world turned upside down. 6 of his fellow Marines were pinned down behind a damaged vehicle with no way out. The enemy fire was too heavy, and backup was still 20 minutes away. That's 20 minutes too long when you're watching your brothers getting picked off one by one. Robert knew he had to do something, even if it meant putting his own life on the line. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his rifle and ran straight into the line of fire. Everyone thought he had lost his mind, but Robert had a plan. He drew the enemy's attention to himself, zigzagging between rocks and using every piece of cover he could find. For 15 terrifying minutes, he kept those Taliban fighters busy, while his squad members crawled to safety one by one. When the smoke cleared and backup finally arrived, Robert had single-handedly saved 6 lives. The Bronze Star with Valor that he received months later wasn't something he asked for or even wanted at first. But his commanding officer told him something that stuck with him forever. "This medal isn't just for you, Thompson. It's for every Marine who will look at it and remember that we never leave our people behind." That's why Robert wore that pin every day at work. Not because he wanted people to think he was a hero, but because he wanted to remember his promise to those 6 Marines and all the others who didn't make it home. Every morning when he pinned that Bronze Star to his uniform, he was reminding himself that service means something, that sacrifice means something, and that some things are worth fighting for. The courthouse job suited Robert perfectly. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work that served the community. He liked helping people navigate the confusing building, giving directions to nervous families heading to court, and making sure everyone felt safe while they dealt with their legal matters. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough for his small apartment and simple lifestyle. More importantly, it gave him a sense of purpose without the constant danger he had faced overseas. Robert had developed a routine over the years. He would arrive 30 minutes early, check all the metal detectors, review the daily court schedule, and chat with the other security officers about anything except his military service. He learned that most people didn't really want to hear war stories, and he was fine with that. The Bronze Star pin was enough of a conversation starter for those who were curious, but most people just walked past without noticing. The other courthouse employees respected Robert. Judge Williams, who had been on the bench for 15 years, always made a point to thank Robert for his service whenever they crossed paths. The court clerks trusted him to handle difficult situations with calm professionalism. Even the attorneys, who were often stressed and impatient, treated Robert with courtesy because he never made their complicated days any harder. But Robert's peaceful routine was about to be shattered by someone who saw his Bronze Star pin very differently than everyone else had for the past 5 years. Someone who would view his quiet pride in his military service not as honor, but as a problem that needed to be solved immediately. On that particular Tuesday morning, Robert had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He went through his usual routine, checking his equipment, straightening his uniform, and making sure his Bronze Star pin was properly positioned. He had worn that pin through hundreds of normal days, but this wouldn't be one of them. The first sign of trouble came when Robert noticed unusual activity near the main courtroom. There were more people than usual bustling around, and everyone seemed a bit more tense than normal. He later learned that a new judge was starting that day, someone fresh from a big city law firm who had been appointed to fill Judge Martinez's position after his retirement. Robert didn't think much about it at first. New judges came and went, and most of them were decent people who understood that everyone in the courthouse was just trying to do their job. He figured this new judge would be no different from the others. He was about to learn just how wrong that assumption could be. As Robert stood at his post watching people filter through the metal detectors, he had no idea that someone was already watching him, studying his uniform, and preparing to challenge something that had never been challenged before. The Bronze Star that had represented honor, sacrifice, and brotherhood was about to become the center of a controversy that would change everything Robert thought he knew about respect and recognition. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose just how differently people could view the same symbol of service. And Robert was about to meet someone who would see his military honor not as something to be respected, but as something that needed to be removed immediately. The new judge arrived at exactly 8:30 a.m., clicking across the marble floor in expensive heels that echoed through the courthouse lobby. Judge Patricia Winters was everything Robert wasn't used to seeing in their small-town courthouse. Her designer suit probably cost more than Robert made in a month, and she carried herself like someone who was used to getting her way without question. Robert had seen plenty of judges come and go during his 5 years at the courthouse, but Judge Winters was different from the start. While most new judges took time to observe how things worked before making changes, she walked in like she owned the place. Within her first hour, she had already questioned the placement of the water cooler, complained about the temperature in her chambers, and demanded that someone explain why the courthouse coffee wasn't from a premium brand. The courthouse staff were whispering among themselves about the new judge's attitude, but Robert just focused on his job. He had learned long ago that workplace drama was best avoided, especially when you needed your paycheck to keep coming. He figured Judge Winters was probably just nervous about her first day and would settle down once she got comfortable. Around 10 a.m., Robert was helping an elderly man figure out which courtroom he needed when he noticed Judge Winters standing near the security checkpoint, watching him with a frown on her face. She had her arms crossed and seemed to be studying his uniform very carefully. Robert finished helping the elderly gentleman and walked over to see if the judge needed assistance. "Is there something I can help you with, Your Honor?" Robert asked, politely, using the respectful tone he had learned to use with all the judges. Judge Winters looked him up and down like she was inspecting a soldier, which made Robert feel uncomfortable. Her eyes stopped on his Bronze Star pin, and her frown deepened. "What is that?" she asked, pointing directly at the small Bronze Star on his uniform. Robert was confused by the question. Every judge in the courthouse knew about his military service, and most of them had complimented him on his service over the years. "It's my Bronze Star, Your Honor. I received it during my service in Afghanistan." "I can see what it is," Judge Winters replied sharply. "What I want to know is why you think it's appropriate to wear personal decorations on your uniform while you're working in my courthouse." The words hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. In 5 years of working at the courthouse, no one had ever questioned his right to wear his Bronze Star. Judge Williams had actually encouraged him to wear it, saying it was important for young people to see examples of military service. Robert tried to stay calm and professional. "Your Honor, I've been wearing this pin for 5 years without any issues. The previous judges never had any concerns about it." Judge Winters' face hardened. "Well, I'm not the previous judges, am I? This is my courthouse now, and I have different standards. That pin violates our dress code policy." Robert was genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I'm not aware of any dress code policy that prohibits military decorations. Could you show me where that's written down?" This question seemed to make Judge Winters even angrier. Her voice got louder, and several people in the lobby started to notice the conversation. "Are you questioning my authority, Officer Thompson?" she snapped. I don't need to show you anything. I'm telling you that personal decorations are not appropriate for court officers, and that includes whatever political statement you think you're making with that pin. Robert felt his heart racing. Political statement? His Bronze Star wasn't political at all. It was about honor, about the 6 Marines whose lives he had saved, about the promise he had made to never forget his fallen brothers. He tried to explain this to Judge Winters, but she wasn't interested in listening. Your Honor, with all due respect, this isn't a political statement. It's a military honor that recognizes service to our country. I wear it to honor the Marines who didn't come home. Judge Winters waved her hand dismissively. Save the speech for someone who cares. I don't want to hear about your war stories or your heroic adventures. What I want is for you to remove that pin immediately and never wear it in my courthouse again. The conversation was attracting more attention now. Other courthouse employees were pretending to work while obviously listening to every word. Robert could feel his face getting hot with embarrassment and anger, but he forced himself to stay professional. Your Honor, I understand you're concerned about dress codes, but this Bronze Star means everything to me. It's not just a decoration. It represents the most important thing I've ever done in my life. I don't care what it represents to you, Judge Winters replied coldly. What matters is what it represents in my courthouse, and I will not have my staff members wearing personal jewelry that makes political statements. This is a place of law and order, not a military parade ground. Robert tried one more time to make her understand. Your Honor, military decorations aren't political. They're recognition of service and sacrifice. Every courthouse in America allows veterans to wear their medals. Judge Winters stepped closer to Robert, lowering her voice but making her words even more threatening. Let me make this crystal clear, Officer Thompson. You have exactly 2 choices. You can remove that pin right now and never wear it again, or you can find yourself looking for a new job. I will not tolerate insubordination, and I will not allow my courthouse to become a platform for military propaganda. Military propaganda. Those words cut deeper than anything else Judge Winters had said. Robert had risked his life for his country, had saved 6 Marines from certain death, and had carried the physical and emotional scars of war for years. To have his service dismissed as propaganda was more painful than any wound he had received in Afghanistan. Robert looked around the lobby and saw the faces of people he had worked with for years. Some looked sympathetic, others looked embarrassed, and a few looked angry on his behalf. But none of them could help him in this moment. He was alone, facing a choice between his pride and his paycheck. With shaking hands, Robert reached up and unpinned his Bronze Star. The small piece of metal had been with him every day for 5 years, a constant reminder of who he was and what he had done. As he removed it, he felt like he was removing a piece of his identity. Thank you, Judge Winters said with satisfaction. I expect this to be the last time we have this conversation. As she walked away, Robert stood there holding his Bronze Star in his palm, feeling smaller than he had felt since coming home from Afghanistan. He had survived 3 tours of combat, but a 10-minute conversation with a new judge had just stripped away something precious that he thought he would never have to defend. What Robert didn't know was that this humiliating moment was just the beginning of a story that would soon spiral far beyond the walls of their small-town courthouse. What Judge Winters didn't realize was that her confrontation with Robert had been witnessed by more people than she thought. Among those watching was Lisa Rodriguez, a court clerk who had been working at the courthouse for 12 years. Lisa had seen a lot of things in her time there, but nothing had ever made her as angry as what she had just witnessed. Lisa's younger brother David had been killed in Iraq 3 years earlier. He was only 22 when an improvised explosive device ended his life during what was supposed to be a routine patrol. The flag that had covered David's coffin was now folded and displayed in Lisa's living room, and she understood exactly what Robert's Bronze Star meant to him because she knew what her brother's service had meant to her family. As Lisa watched Robert stand there holding his Bronze Star with shaking hands, she felt a rage building inside her that she had never experienced before. This wasn't just about a pin or a dress code. This was about respect for the people who had put their lives on the line for their country. This was about everything her brother had died for. The rest of that day was torture for Robert. He went through the motions of his job, checking IDs, and running the metal detectors, but his heart wasn't in it. Every time he looked down at his uniform, he noticed the empty space where his Bronze Star used to be. It was like having a constant reminder that his service didn't matter, that his sacrifice wasn't worth recognizing. During his lunch break, Robert sat alone in his car in the courthouse parking lot, holding his Bronze Star and wondering if he should just quit. He had never felt so humiliated in his life. Even during the worst days in Afghanistan, he had never felt like his service was worthless. But Judge Winters had made him feel exactly that way in front of his co-workers and the people he served every day. Meanwhile, Lisa couldn't get the morning's events out of her head. She kept thinking about her brother David and how proud he had been to serve his country. She thought about all the military families who had sacrificed so much, and she couldn't understand how anyone could treat a decorated veteran the way Judge Winters had treated Robert. Around 2 p.m., Lisa's opportunity came. Judge Winters was in the hallway talking loudly on her phone, complaining to someone about the unprofessional standards she had found at the courthouse. Lisa happened to be walking by when she heard Judge Winters say something that made her blood boil. "You wouldn't believe the circus I walked into here," Judge Winters was saying. "I had to put a stop to one of the security guards showing off with his military medals. These people think they can turn my courthouse into some kind of patriotic display. I told him to take off his little war trophy and keep his military propaganda to himself." Lisa stopped dead in her tracks. War trophy? Military propaganda? She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Without thinking, she pulled out her phone and started recording. Judge Winters was so absorbed in her conversation that she didn't notice Lisa standing nearby. "I don't care if he saved 100 soldiers," Judge Winters continued. "This is a professional environment, not a military museum. If these veterans want to show off their medals, they can do it on their own time, not on mine. I'm going to make it very clear that this kind of grandstanding won't be tolerated in my courthouse." Lisa's hands were shaking as she recorded every word. She had heard enough. This wasn't about dress codes or professionalism. This was about a judge who had no respect for military service and no understanding of what sacrifice really meant. That evening, Lisa went home and watched the recording over and over again. She thought about calling Robert to warn him about what Judge Winters had said, but she realized that wouldn't solve the real problem. The real problem was that Judge Winters' attitude needed to be exposed for what it really was. Lisa had never been active on social media before, but she had accounts on Facebook and Twitter that she rarely used. That night, she created a post that would change everything. She wrote about what she had witnessed that morning, about how a decorated war hero had been humiliated for wearing his Bronze Star, and about how Judge Winters had called his military service propaganda and grandstanding. But Lisa didn't stop there. She included the audio recording of Judge Winters' phone conversation, making sure everyone could hear exactly what the judge really thought about veterans and their service. She ended her post with a simple message. "This is how Judge Patricia Winters treats our military heroes. Is this the kind of person we want making decisions in our courthouse?" Lisa shared the post in several local Facebook groups, including the County Veterans Organization and the Military Family Support Group that she had joined after her brother's death. She also tagged several local news stations and veteran advocacy groups, hoping that someone would pay attention to what had happened. What Lisa didn't expect was how quickly the story would spread. Within 2 hours of posting, her message had been shared over 100 times. Local veterans were commenting with their own stories of disrespect and discrimination. Military families were expressing outrage at Judge Winters' treatment of Robert. The local news stations were already reaching out to Lisa for interviews. By midnight, the story had jumped from local Facebook groups to regional veteran organizations. Someone had created a hashtag, Respect Our Veterans. The story was being shared on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. People were posting photos of their own military medals and sharing stories about family members who had served. Robert had no idea what was happening until his phone started ringing at 6 a.m. the next morning. It was his cousin calling from 2 states away, asking if he was the Robert Thompson who had been in the news. Robert was completely confused until his cousin explained that his story was all over social media. When Robert finally saw Lisa's post and heard the recording of Judge Winter's phone conversation, he felt a mix of emotions he couldn't describe. On one hand, he was grateful that someone had stood up for him. On the other hand, he was terrified about what this would mean for his job and his quiet life. The story was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. National veteran organizations were picking it up and sharing it with their millions of followers. Military blogs were writing articles about it. Local TV stations were calling the courthouse asking for interviews with both Robert and Judge Winters. By the time Robert arrived, at work that morning, there were news vans in the courthouse parking lot and reporters waiting by the front door. The quiet, peaceful job that had been perfect for him was about to become the center of a national controversy that would change his life forever. What had started as one woman's decision to record an injustice was now a viral movement that would force everyone involved to face consequences they never saw coming. The Bronze Star that Judge Winters had tried to silence was about to become the symbol of a much larger conversation about respect, service, and what it really means to honor those who serve. By Thursday morning, the courthouse had turned into a media circus. Robert couldn't even get to the front door without being surrounded by reporters shouting questions at him. Camera crews were set up across the street and protesters had started, gathering with signs that read, "Honor our veterans" and "Respect military service." Robert had never wanted this kind of attention. All he had ever wanted was to do his job quietly and honor his fallen brothers with his Bronze Star. Now his face was on national television, and strangers from across the country were calling him a hero for something that had nothing to do with his military service. The story had taken on a life of its own. Morning talk shows were discussing the incident. Veterans organizations were organizing rallies. Social media was flooded with photos of people wearing their military medals in solidarity with Robert. The hashtag #RespectOurVeterans had been used over 1 million times in just 3 days. But while Robert was becoming a symbol of veteran rights, Judge Winters was discovering that fame could work both ways. Investigative reporters had started digging into her background, and what they found wasn't pretty. It turned out that her treatment of Robert wasn't an isolated incident. Channel 7 News had found court records showing that Judge Winters had made several questionable decisions involving veterans in her previous position at the county courthouse in the city. In one case, she had sentenced a veteran with PTSD to maximum jail time for a minor offense, ignoring recommendations from mental health professionals. In another case, she had refused to consider military service as a character reference during a sentencing hearing. The local newspaper interviewed several attorneys who had worked with Judge Winters before her appointment. One lawyer, speaking anonymously, said that Judge Winters had once referred to veteran preference hiring policies as unfair advantages for people who chose to play soldier. Another attorney recalled her saying that military service was just another job and shouldn't be treated as anything special. These revelations were adding fuel to an already burning fire. Veterans groups that had initially focused on supporting Robert were now calling for Judge Winters to be removed from the bench entirely. The State Veterans Affairs Office issued a statement expressing concern about her fitness to serve in a position that required understanding and compassion. Meanwhile, Robert was struggling with his newfound fame. His phone rang constantly with interview requests, job offers, and messages of support. People were sending him money through online fundraising platforms, even though he had never asked for financial help. Military families were sharing their own stories of discrimination and thanking him for bringing attention to issues they had faced in silence. The support was overwhelming and touching, but it was also exhausting. Robert had always been a private person who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Now he couldn't go to the grocery store without being recognized. He couldn't eat lunch in peace without someone approaching him to share their own military story or ask for a photo. On Friday afternoon, Robert was called into a meeting with courthouse administration. He expected to be fired, but instead, he found himself facing a group of nervous administrators who were trying to figure out how to handle the situation. "Robert," said the courthouse supervisor, "we want you to know that we fully support you and your right to wear your Bronze Star. We've reviewed all policies and there's nothing that prohibits military decorations on uniforms." the administrator continued. We're also conducting a formal review of the incident with Judge Winters. Her behavior was completely inappropriate, and we want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Robert appreciated the support, but he could see the stress in everyone's faces. The constant media attention was affecting the entire courthouse operation. Trials were being delayed because reporters were disrupting proceedings. Security was overwhelmed, trying to manage the crowds outside. The other judges were complaining that they couldn't do their jobs effectively. I appreciate everything you're saying, Robert replied. But I think we all know that this situation has gotten out of control. I never wanted any of this attention. I just wanted to wear my Bronze Star and do my job. The truth was, Robert was starting to realize that his quiet life at the courthouse was over, regardless of how the situation with Judge Winters was resolved. Every day brought new protesters, new media coverage, and new disruptions. Even if Judge Winters left tomorrow, Robert would always be known as that veteran from the courthouse incident. That weekend, Robert received a phone call that would change everything. The caller identified himself as Tom Bradley, the founder of a national security company that specialized in hiring veterans. Tom had seen Robert's story on the news and had a proposition that Robert never could have imagined. Robert, Tom said, I've been following your story and I'm impressed by how you've handled this whole situation with dignity and class. I want to offer you a position with our company as a regional training director. You'd be traveling around the country, training security personnel and teaching workplace sensitivity regarding veterans. The salary Tom offered was nearly double what Robert made at the courthouse. More importantly, the job would allow him to turn his painful experience into something positive by helping other veterans avoid similar situations. But Robert wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. Judge Winters was still on the bench, still making decisions that affected people's lives and still showing no signs of understanding why her treatment of him had been wrong. In fact, she had remained completely silent throughout the entire controversy, refusing all interview requests and hiding behind a statement from her attorney that claimed she was being unfairly targeted. The pressure on Judge Winters was mounting from multiple directions. The State Judicial Conduct Board had opened a formal investigation into her behavior. Local politicians were calling for her resignation. The County Bar Association had issued a statement expressing concern about her conduct. More damaging stories continued to emerge. A former law clerk came forward to describe Judge Winters' dismissive attitude toward military families who appeared in her courtroom. A court reporter revealed that Judge Winters had once said that veterans who claimed PTSD were looking for excuses for their behavior. By the following Monday, it was clear that Judge Winters' position was becoming impossible to maintain. The Dow courthouse was still surrounded by protesters, and several major veterans organizations had announced plans for a large demonstration the following weekend. Robert found himself at the center of a storm that was much larger than his personal situation. What had started as a simple request to wear his Bronze Star had evolved into a national conversation about how veterans should be treated in the workplace and whether Judge Winters was fit to serve in a position of authority. As Robert stood at his security post that Monday morning, wearing his Bronze Star pin that he had quietly put back on over the weekend, he realized that his life would never be the same again. The quiet courthouse job that had been perfect for him was ending, whether he wanted it to or not. On Wednesday morning of the third week, Robert arrived at work to find something he had never expected to see. Judge Winters' office was being cleared out. Boxes were being carried to a waiting car, and courthouse staff were whispering excitedly about what had happened overnight. Lisa from the clerk's office approached Robert with a huge smile on her face. Did you hear? Judge Winters submitted her resignation letter at 6 a.m. this morning. She's gone, Robert. She's actually gone. The resignation letter was brief and carefully worded by lawyers. Judge Winters cited irreconcilable differences with courthouse culture and a desire to pursue other opportunities in the private sector. There was no apology to Robert, no acknowledgement that she had done anything wrong, and no recognition of the pain she had caused. But Robert didn't need an apology anymore. Over the past 3 weeks, he had received something much more valuable than Judge Winters could ever give him. He had received validation from thousands of veterans across the country who had shared their own stories of workplace discrimination. He had received support from military families who understood the significance of his Bronze Star. Most importantly, he had rediscovered his own sense of worth and purpose. The courthouse staff threw an impromptu celebration in the break room that afternoon. Someone had brought cake, and there were congratulatory cards from veteran organizations across the state. Judge Williams, who had returned from vacation the day before, made a point of publicly thanking Robert for his service and his dignity throughout the ordeal. "Robert," Judge Williams said in front of everyone, "you've shown this community what real honor looks like. You could have responded to this situation with anger or bitterness, but instead, you've conducted yourself with the same integrity that earned you that Bronze Star in the first place." But even as everyone celebrated Judge Winter's departure, Robert was wrestling with a decision that would surprise everyone. The media attention hadn't died down with the judge's resignation. If anything, it had intensified. National news programs wanted to interview him. Book publishers were calling with offers to tell his story. Speaking bureaus wanted to book him for events across the country. The problem was that Robert had never wanted to be a public figure. He had never wanted to be the face of veteran rights or workplace discrimination. All he had ever wanted was to honor his fallen brothers and do his job in peace. But the past 3 weeks had shown him that sometimes life has different plans. That evening, Robert sat in his small apartment looking at his Bronze Star pin and thinking about everything that had happened. On his kitchen table were 3 different job offers that had come in just that week. The security company position was still available, with an even better salary than originally offered. A veteran advocacy organization wanted him to become their national spokesperson. A major corporation had offered him a position in their veteran outreach program. Robert's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his old squad leader from Afghanistan, calling from California. "Thompson, you crazy Marine," his former sergeant said with a laugh. "I saw you on the news. Never thought I'd see the day when wearing your Bronze Star would make you famous." They talked for over an hour about the old days, about the friends they had lost, and about what the Bronze Star really meant to both of them. By the end of the conversation, Robert knew what he had to do. The next morning, Robert walked into the courthouse supervisor's office and submitted his resignation. It wasn't because he was angry or because he felt unwelcome. It was because he had finally understood what his Bronze Star was really trying to tell him. "I've realized something over the past few weeks," Robert explained to his surprised supervisor. "I've been hiding in this job for 5 years, trying to live a quiet life and avoid attention, but that's not what my Bronze Star represents. It represents stepping up when you're needed, even when it's scary or uncomfortable." 2 weeks later, Robert was standing in a conference room in Atlanta, wearing his Bronze Star pin and addressing a group of corporate executives about veteran hiring and workplace sensitivity. He had accepted the position with the security company, but with a twist that no one had expected. Instead of just training security personnel, Robert had proposed creating a comprehensive program to help companies understand military culture and support their veteran employees. His first-hand experience with workplace discrimination had given him insights that no textbook could provide. The first training session was awkward. Robert wasn't a natural public speaker, and he felt nervous, addressing a room full of business leaders. But when he started talking about what his Bronze Star meant, about the Marines who hadn't come home, and about why respect for military service mattered in the workplace, something magical happened. The room became completely silent, and Robert could see that his message was getting through. Over the following months, Robert traveled to dozens of companies across the country. He trained HR departments about veteran employment issues. He spoke to employee groups about military culture and PTSD awareness. He helped companies create policies that would prevent other veterans from experiencing what he had gone through. Work was challenging but incredibly rewarding. Robert was using his painful experience to help others, and he was finally living up to the promise he had made to his fallen brothers. He wasn't just wearing his Bronze Star anymore. He was actively honoring what it represented. 6 months after Judge Winter's resignation, Robert received an invitation that brought his journey full circle. A congressional subcommittee was holding hearings on veteran workplace rights, and they wanted him to testify about his experience. On a crisp morning in Washington, D.C., Robert sat at a witness table in a packed congressional hearing room. He wore his best suit, and his Bronze Star was prominently displayed on his lapel. As he looked out at the room full of legislators, journalists, and veteran advocates, he thought about how far he had come from that humiliating day when Judge Winters had forced him to remove his pin. "My name is Robert Thompson," he began, his voice steady and confident, "and I'm here to talk about what happens when we forget to honor the people who serve our country." For the next hour, Robert told his story to Congress and to the nation. He talked about the significance of military decorations, about the challenges veterans face in civilian workplaces, and about the importance of creating environments where service is respected rather than hidden. When he finished his testimony, the committee chairman thanked him for his service and his courage in bringing these issues to light. As Robert left the hearing room, he was approached by dozens of veterans and military family members who wanted to share their own stories and thank him for speaking up. That evening, Robert called his old squad leader to tell him about the hearing. "You know what's funny?" Robert said. "Judge Winters tried to destroy my career by making me remove my Bronze Star. But all she really did was help me find the career I was meant to have all along." Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Robert's Bronze Star had been threatened, but it had never been more powerful than it was now, opening doors and changing lives across the country.